Alright, guys. Welcome to our first Cryptid show. Wait till at least some people get in before we start the spill, but this is the very first episode. If you'd like to donate to help the channel grow, the chat's in the chat. There's a link up top or in the description for the Streamlabs to have a little some cool animations, some zombies and things like that. So I'm sure I'll have to repeat the little e-begging process, but I've been kind of gnawing at the bits, counting down the day today for this um, episode okay because I've actually found out more information that I had thought to be fact was debunked, and so that kind of like kicked me on a trail today. But um, I'm gonna go through today in my objects in this first podcast about the Mothman. As we might be able to get through quite a bit of it in one podcast. I think we should, but I really want to put you guys in that area. I want you guys to kind of like understand the history of the area before we even get into the Mothman, so you kind of know the backstory and the legend of how this urban legend, how this phenomenon kind of got started. And it's pretty intriguing once you start delving into the history of Point Pleasant on just the property itself. Um, Going back to the settlers and the Native Americans, their wars on that ground, to World War II, and the big role that this small rural town played um, in both of those major American events. Uh, I found these things to be very intriguing, and of course, one of the biggest reasons I think I started on the Mothman for this cryptid show was because of my family roots that run pretty deep um, in the Point Pleasant, Arizona. Not just like my immediate family, with my grandmother and my grandfather, um, and cousins, aunts, uncles, and things. But it is said, we've had a cousin do the DNA tracking and things like that to show that we're direct descendants from Chief Cornstalk himself, and we'll get into that um, here in a little bit on exactly who Chief Cornstalk was and what his major role was in Point Pleasant. Um, it's very intriguing stuff, man. I really uh, once delving into this, and I'm going to go ahead and throw out the reference book that I have been referencing a lot from and cross-referencing with is Mothman: The Facts Behind the Legend by Donnie Sargent Jr. and Jeff Wamesley. Phenomenal book. They did a great job of capturing a lot of these eyewitnesses and actually getting um, a lot of these first responders, like these first initial reports that happened in '66, um, which is pretty. It's kind of, you get into this area of Point Pleasant from '65 to the '67. It's pretty insane. I think it got a little bit of everything for everybody, from cryptology to paranormal to UFOs. I mean, everything is there to kind of birth a urban legend, or if it's true. I'm not here to persuade um, your decision or your way of looking at this. I'm not here to prove that it's real. I'm not here to prove that it's not. I'm here to kind of go over what I've researched and what my way of thinking kind of is, and we'll kind of go from there. Well, we'll give it a little bit. I'll give it about a couple more minutes before we start delving in. I've already shared it out, so hopefully, let me share it out again. Hopefully, get some more people in here, so I'm just not babbling on to myself. Yeah, I'll give it about another 2 more minutes. We'll get this thing going. I'll get on all the shared out soon. I probably should have done this before I came live, but hey, who knows, right? All right, we'll go ahead and get going. Now, for me, like if we're talking about the Mothman, I haven't really seen this approach before when somebody's talking about the Mothman as far as going back and revealing the history of this land. Okay, like the history of this land is pretty insane. I mean, you had the Kawana and Ohio rivers, the bloody day long battle, which all of accounts, which the records could be off or whatever, but it kind of seems like um, Colonel Andrew Lewis had 1,100 soldiers, 1,100 settlers, kind of going up against Chief Cornstalk's 1,100 Native American tribe. So it's kind of even in that sense, but you got muskets versus tomahawks. I mean, it was even, but it wasn't. You know what I mean? Ultimately, in 1774, this battle goes down. It's one of the biggest battles, the bloodiest battles of the settlers and Indians in our country. It's one of the biggest ones. Um, hey, Doris, that happens throughout our history, right? Like this is in this little area where these two rivers meet has one of the biggest battles in the settler Native American war, right there. And that brings me to another thing. A lot of the Native Americans did not want to settle anywhere near Point Pleasant because they believed it to be cursed land because it is where two different rivers meet. I was not able to figure out why that lore was with the Native Americans, why they believed that way. Um, However, that's what hardly anybody wanted to settle there. Chief Cornstalk, who was a part of the Shawnee tribe, kind of took his own tribe, the Cornstalk tribe, and settled in there, kind of going against the grain, if you will, of this being a cursed land. Now, later on in the Battle of 1774, the day-long battle, um, it was believed up to like recently until 2006 that Chief Cornstalk himself had cursed the land for 200 years. In 2006, they was able to debunk this by uh, some things they found in an old schoolhouse of all places. They found an old play from the late 1800s that kind of debunked this theory of Cornstalk cursing the land because there was no within this play there was nothing really added to that to kind of so they believe it's kind of like along the lines of this thing was added on to be fluff to add something to this lore to this battle which if it really didn't need much more added to it in my opinion but the chief Cornstalk that they believe that he cursed the land again was debunked in 2006. uh, that's another one of my family ties. Again, it is believed that we're direct descendants down from Chief Cornstalk himself, and my family has been down, and my family roots has run down that area for a very long time. So it's pretty. It's pretty. I grew up with this lore of the Mothman. I grew up with hearing the stories, and I would ask my grandfather that lived down there his thoughts on if he thought the Mothman exists, and he would always come back with I don't know what those guys were smoking or drinking on, but I've never seen anything like that, and that was kind of like an overall feeling for the town later on in the years. But again, we're starting off with how bloody this land was. And the Native Americans believed it to be cursed. They didn't even want to settle there because, the meeting of two rivers, I guess, is some sort of bad omen. And again, I could not find anywhere uh, why that is, why they thought that, why that was a thing. I couldn't really find too much on that, really. And uh, it just it's just one of those things that the settlers come in and they did what they did to the Native Americans, and they kind of washed away a lot of that uh, heritage, a lot of the beliefs, and those things are kind of drowned away. And yeah, so I went through like all day today trying to find why they believe that to be cursed because of these rivers meeting, and really couldn't come up with an answer. So if anybody watching this knows that answer, I would greatly thank you uh, for passing that knowledge on, because it's driving me insane today trying to find why uh, this was. I just couldn't find it anywhere. Um, then you move on. Okay, we move on from 1774, and around the World War II time, Point Pleasant becomes prevalent again. Right? They start storing a lot of the TNT in World War II for the atom bomb. They got the TNT plant out there, and they're doing a lot of things. Big governments. When I tell you it's a big government facility that was down there, this thing was over 8,000 acres of government facility that was helped building the atomic bomb. Like, this is where a lot of their TNT and their explosive was stowed, was within this I can tell you it was 8,320 acres used by the Army from 1942 to 1945 to produce TNT. So you take all of this massive area, okay, over 8,000 acres. I mean, that is quite a bit of chunk of land. And what is happening around this time, from everything I've researched and delved into, was um, that is kind of where most of the residents around this time period in Point Pleasant was getting their work. And even how they went to work was insane to me. They would load them up on buses with blacked out windows and take them to work and take them back from work. So this is the history of this land that's going that's going on before the Mothman, before anything is going on. I mean, we're talking about the 40s here, of them using this TNT 8,000 blot of land to harness and stow TNT for the Army for the first bomb, the first atomic bomb. And so immediately when they drop the bomb on, hey Muggs, nice to see you, buddy. When we dropped the bomb, the first atomic bomb in World War II, they shut down the facility, which means, a majority of this town has now lost work. And now we got these 8,000 plus acres that is now abandoned. It is now shut down. They in the town itself, they had two plants. They had North Plant and the South Plant. The North Plant is where a lot of the majority of the sightings was happening was there. For some reason, the South Plant, couldn't find anything no real sightings on the South Plant of this creature or whatever. I mean, there's been plenty of people that said, could have been sandhill cranes, could have been owls. Nobody really knew. I mean, they did find contaminated water running off the TNT lands that was going directly into the Ohio River. They kind of fixed all that up. They did demo the TNT factory, the North factory there. They demoed that down. They did a big cleanup in the 1990s. So everything's supposed to be A-okay down there. It's actually, they leased off several different companies end up leasing parts of this land, including like a biochemistry study. Leased off a pretty big chunk of this land. Another big chunk of this land is just a wildlife preserve for people to go hunt, fish, camp, do that type of thing. But even the author of the book that I got a lot of my references from, he does a lot of hunting and fishing up there, and he's one of the ones that he would even say at night it gets kind of eerie out there. And if you are down there, right, it's hard for these things. Like if you say Sasquatch exists, but you live in a city, there's no real way you can wrap your mind around saying something like a Mothman or a Sasquatch or a Goat Man or something like that exists because you're just not in that area. But I can tell you, going down in that area and experiencing that area myself, you can definitely see how something like this could hide, thrive, and do whatever. I mean, I got my own theories on how and what this thing is, and we're getting ready to delve into that. I just wanted to make sure you guys kind of knew the history about the land that we're getting ready to talk about. It's building up, okay? It's building up. We're just in the 40s talking about this massive plot of land that was huge in World War II. It was huge in the American settlers and the Native Americans in that battle. So there's a lot of history in this little bitty town. And you got to think, whether you believe in the paranormal or not, which everybody knows, I tend to. I tend to believe in. I don't buy in all the way, but I tend to believe in it. That's a lot of stored up energy ready to manifest itself. Okay, and then when World War II ends, they close shop. A lot of people lose their jobs. The land's kind of pieced out. The government kind of keeps hold on part of the land. Like you go down there today, where the Mothman was first spotted, up by the North Plant. There's still tons of cameras up in trees, just fences and signs, and kind of trying to keep everybody out, keep everybody away, right? So my brain goes to why. If nothing happened, then why? And again, here comes where another one of my family ties goes. My grandfather actually worked for a furniture company that was right off of the North Plant. All right, so around 65, 66, around this time period, they decided to reach out and they thought that they needed extra security. They didn't give no explanation, I don't think. They just wanted extra security around there. Now, my grandfather was the type of man, he grew up in the hills. Like, when you went to my grandfather's house, if the moon wasn't out, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Pitch dark. So there really wasn't nothing that could unnerve this man. And yet he went one night down there and did the late shift. I don't know if it was second or third shift. It was late in the evening. He stood the security role for the night. And the very next night, he was asking my grandmother to go along with him. And his excuse was he was bored. Which is, it's insane because a lot of these eyewitnesses' accounts kind of have the same vibe to it. Like, things start to get different around there in the late evening and night hours. Even to where the locals really don't like to be down and around that area at a certain point in time. So we'll creep up into now. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. The first Mothman sighting actually wasn't in Point Pleasant. It was right up the road, a few miles right up the road. Same year, in 1966, it's spot in Clemson, West Virginia. A couple grave diggers was out, and they spotted a man that they said, or a man-like creature that was about 7 foot tall, with a gigantic wingspan flying through the trees up and around them. Now, this happened in November of 1966 in that small town right up the road from Point Pleasant. And then in the same month, November 15th, is when Linda Sculberry had her first sighting in Point Pleasant, right up the road. So this thing, it expands such a distance. And since the 60s, it's been spotted in other words, but I ain't going to hop around too much, but we'll get to that too. Now, this whole story for me starts in 65. Okay, in 65, like most of the country, there's like a UFO spotting spike where a lot of UFOs are getting spotted. And for some reason, in Point Pleasant, it was like the Mecca point for West Virginia. I mean, there was tons of UFO spottings coming around, but down there in this small town, there was flooding in nightly in 1965. I mean, it was just flooding in, just UFO reports after UFO reports. It got so bad they actually had to dedicate a wing strictly to the UFO reports. They actually put an officer on it, and that was kind of his thing. He would cover these UFO reports because it was flooding in nightly. And again, we'll go back to the North Plant that we was just talking about. A lot of the UFO spottings was kind of up and around that area. I mean, of course, you're looking at an 8,000 plus acre area, so I mean that's a pretty broad area, and a lot of those UFO sightings start happening then. Okay, now we got 65 with the UFO sightings. Enter the wonderful Men in Black, and I'm not talking about Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. These guys, excuse me, these guys, by all accounts, like everybody that had a run-in with these Men in Black, all have the same account. They look pretty much human, other than their skin was kind of transparent. You could see the veins in their hands, and it was almost like you could almost see through their skin. Their skin was like really thin, like how we have several layers. Maybe there was missing layers or something like that. They looked pretty much human, but was just off a little bit. So in 65, you got a lot of these Men in Black spottings in Point Pleasant. You got all these UFO things going down in Point Pleasant. Everybody's buzzed and kind of on edge in this town because of all these things happening. These Men in Black driving dark cars, coming up to these people that are spotting UFOs and kind of trying to intimidate them and trying to get them to not report on that. So this is all going down in 65, which leads us into 66, when the Mothman is first spotted. The Mothman is first spotted in Point Pleasant on November 15th, 1966, up by the North Plant. There was two married couples in there, Miss Strawberry and her ex-husband at the time. Then I believe it to be, I don't know if it's the same Mary or not, but her friend Mary and her husband. Okay, they're driving out there. Linda Strawberry says her first encounter that she can remember about this Mothman was that they're pulling up to the North Plant, right? They're pulling up to the North Plant, and this beast has its wing caught in a gate. They're like on the opposite side of the gate, and he's using his arm to kind of get the wing loose. They're all wanting to go. They're all trying to go, but they're almost like in a paralyzed, hypnotized type state because of the eyes. Everybody that has any kind of run-in with this thing all has the same account. They can't make out the facial features of this creature because the eyes are so bright. These bright red eyes like you see over my head right now. That would kind of just overglow and almost hypnotize you in to where he's like in this paralyzed state where you're that state of fear where you can't move. So they're watching this beast. It finally breaks loose and it takes off. It shoots straight up in the air with ungodly amount of speed. Right, Doris? I mean, that would I would definitely be like beyond freaked out at that point, and so was they. So they try to get out of there as quick as possible. They get on Route 62, and it's a straight stretch. They're going, and they realize this thing is following them in their 57 Chevy. They reach speeds up to like 100 miles per hour, and this thing is keeping up to him like it was effortless, like if he would do 2 mile per hour. I mean, it's going 100 mile per hour, and this thing is keeping steady pace with this vehicle and all the way down this stretch. So this happens roughly around 11:30 p.m. Different accounts. Like I read one piece that said 11:30. I read another one that said 12. So in between 11:30 12. They get back to town, park the car. They're freaked out. This thing was hitting the top of the car, and the guy driving. I mean, I guess this was like his baby, his '57 Chevy. So now he's upset, right? Because he's looking at the top of the car. There is scratch marks. There are things. So they're all like trying to figure out what to do, how to handle the situation. Did this really happen? Kind of in a state of shock. They do go to the police department, and again, it depends on what articles you read on these things, um, on what their report was and what time that happened. I read 2 o'clock in the morning. I've read 1 o'clock in the morning. So roughly in between 11 and 2, all these things happen. So these 4 people go into the police station there in Point Pleasant. They do their report, and the sheriff initially, he just kind of shakes them off, thinking, okay, they're younger, they're either drunk, on drugs, or something. Well, during the interview process, on interviewing what's going on, they realize that they know these people. It's a very small town. They know these people. They know their parents, and with the interactions with them, they realize these guys, they're not drunk. They're not on drugs. They're not on anything, and they're thoroughly scared. And so they go out to the vehicle and see the scratch marks on top of the car. So this is where the Mothman kind of gets its birth. From this one incident, within 1 year, there was over 100 different reports. In 1 year, 100 different reports of the Mothman in or around the Point Pleasant area. So 365 days, there was over 100 reports. It's insane itself. Now, enters a guy by the name John Kill. John Kill was a paranormal enthusiast. He was a reporter in New York who caught wind of this story. He came all the way down from New York and actually stayed in Point Pleasant. Well, he stayed over the river there in Galplesh for a while, and then he actually ended up staying at Linda Sculberry's parents' house, which after all this happened, it scared her so bad that her and her ex-husband actually moved in with her father and was staying in the basement. Well, John Kill comes down, which we're getting into. That's the author of the Mothman Prophecies. If you guys ever watched the movie The Mothman Prophecies, it's kind of loosely based off that book. And that's where the Mothman kind of starts to get this harbinger of doom, or whatever they call it. That they think that this guy is this creature is either warning people about certain doom or causing certain doom. Now, here's my theories. Okay, so within this town, you got 6 people that kind of had these experiences with Mothman. That kind of pick this up. They have these experiences, right? They're freaked out. Well, Mary Hyde was a reporter for the local newspaper down there. Okay, so she's one of these people that's taking in all the reports. She really has most of the information. She's the one that's really on the phone and kind of putting all this information out there. Now, another oddity that I found through different reports and things was a lot of these women that had an encounter with this beast ended up being pregnant around the same time. And John Kill's theory, which again, he was more interested in the UFO and the Men in Black thing. That was kind of down his groove. That was in his little home base there. He was more intrigued about that, and he was trying to warn these women that, okay, this Mothman. Now, Linda Sculberry, she ended up seeing the Mothman several times. There's things that she wouldn't talk about. She speaks of other instances where the Mothman, she was looking out of, it was late at night, she was sleeping, and she was upstairs looking out and seeing this beast kind of just sitting with its elbows on its knees, its wings kind of tucked to its back, almost like it was more scared, like cold. It wasn't. Her account was there was so many times, and this is very true with all these sightings that happened with the Mothman. if it was menacing in any nature, it had plenty of time and plenty of opportunity to harm, kill, maim, do whatever it wanted to do to humans. I mean, there was nothing preventing this thing from doing this. Nothing at all. And it never did. It never harmed anybody other than a few scratches on a car. Her firm belief on the Mothman, Miss Carberry believed that it was more of a distraction tool. And that's where I kind of start to dig in. That's why I bring up John Kill and the Men in Black and the UFOs. Because just the year before, we had all these UFO spottings down there spiking. We had the Men in Black start coming around. Well, then the Mothman, once the Mothman is spotted, now the Men in Black are focusing in on the people that have seen this Mothman. More so the females than the males that have spotted it. And again, another weird, you can call it a synchronicity. You can call it coincidence. This could be just mass hysteria that's taken over this town. Whatever you want to call it. But to me, it's something more, because all these females that had these experiences with the Mothman, they wind up getting pregnant around the same time. Okay, so John Kill comes down, and he's a big paranormal investigator, mostly UFOs, Men in Black, because everybody knows, these Men in Black things or people or whatever you want to call them, has been spotted everywhere. So he tells these females that, this is more of a they want your child type thing. Now we're adding into urban legend again. I'm not here to disprove, prove, whatever. I'm not here to try to shift beliefs or to sway you anyway, one way or the other. However, this is where we start getting kind of into this weird realm where we got like the perfect marriage, right? We have the Mothman, so the cryptology's there. We have the UFO and the Men in Black, so we got the alien thing there. There's obviously a lot of paranormal activity. There's a lot of people that still believe that town itself is like a haunted type of town. So we got a lot of different things going on at once. So Linda Scarberry has this experience. It scares her so bad, she moves her family back into her parents' home. They're moved in there. She's just had her child, and here comes one of these vehicles, the Men in Black, right? The dad, her father, by her account, again, this is a great book that I keep referencing back to, Mothman, The Facts Behind the Legend. It's a fantastic book. It has unpublished firsthand accounts and articles that you can read for yourself in their own handwriting. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal to have that and that resource to bounce off of. That's why I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this within the remaining, 20 minutes, 40 minutes we got left. So this guy shows up. This is where Linda Scarberry's at now. She's scared to death. She's kind of taking refuge in her father's home. They show up. The father's still kind of not really believing in this. He knows that his daughter's scared enough to give up her home to move back with them, but he's still not really believing until this one incident. One day, the Men in Black pull up. He kind of goes out to greet them as they're kind of walking up, extends his hand to shake their hand, and by his account, and this is, again, it correlates with everybody else that had these interactions with these Men in Black around the Mothman period. They really didn't know how to act. Like a simple handshake. They didn't really even know how to do a simple handshake. That to them was weird. And when he extended his hand, shook his hand, he noticed the transparent skin where he could see the veins. And it was kind of a different feel. They looked humanish. They looked almost human, but they had that weird vibe to them where they almost had transparent skin. And he sees that and is kind of alarmed a little bit. Goes back in. Now he's a believer. Okay. Now he kind of believes this. Now Mary Hyde, again, another eyewitness. She had her own experiences and was also a reporter for the local newspaper. She said about the same thing about these Men in Black. When they would come in and ask them questions about the Mothman and this, that, and the other, and trying to stop her from putting these reports out. That was like their main goal. It was almost like intimidating Mrs. Hyde on not putting these articles out, which she did not listen. She did. And her and John Kill was kind of the two big players in the Mothman prophecies, the book that later turned into the movie. Um, so she gets visited by these men in black in her office at the news station there, and oh, how about knocking the whole thing over? But she gets a visit there, and the whole time they're visiting with her and trying to persuade her not to release these reports, they're fiddling with like simple things like staplers and pencils, and it's like odd to them. You can tell that by her reports, you can tell they've never really been around or seen these type of things, and that there was kind of an odd, like simple thing like a stapler to them was weird. They couldn't quite grasp what these simple things were, and she did a lot of reports on that. Now, again, you got John Kill who's warning these women, okay, the men in black are here. Don't worry too much about the Mothman. He's kind of a distraction. And if you follow the timeline, like we have from, you know, 1774 all the way up, like there's a lot of crazy things that happen to a very small town that just happens to be located where these rivers meet and things. But he's telling them, you know, don't worry about the Mothman. The Mothman's kind of like a distraction technique. They're here for these children because, again, a lot of these women are pregnant. A lot of these women have these babies, and then that's when the men in black really start. The reports of them really start like going overboard. He said the only way to protect yourself is by getting a crucifix that has to have a gold plated outline around the crucifix. The only way to protect it. Hey, there's Lisa. How you doing? Now this is where my skeptic brain comes in. I'm like, okay, this guy's telling him that. Doris, again, I think there is something with these men in black. There's so many reports that stretch over so many states. Could there be almost like a unit that is there to A, cover up, and B, protect us from certain things? I believe there could be. The Men in Black is such a. We're going to have to do a whole episode just on the Men in Black because there's so much lore about these guys. They pop up in all these areas where crazy things seem to be happening, and it's really interesting within itself. And the fact that I didn't even know, like I said, growing up, I've always heard of the Mothman. The family being down there and me being down there quite a bit, I've always heard stories about the Mothman. On my mother's side, her father and mother, my grandparents, are both kind of from around the same area. And my grandfather, of course, he dismissed it, but yet he was nervous to stand security watch late at night around that area. But he when I asked him about it, he kind of shook it off. On my grandmother's side, I have an uncle who swears up and down, you know, he was chased home by this thing with the big glowing eyes and kind of just gliding behind them. And again, there was never within all these reports, nobody really reports on this thing being menacing. It never hurts anybody. It never really harms anyone. That's why it's like, to me, I think it is more of a distraction thing. What was this thing trying to cover up? What's going on here? So when I'm looking through and I'm reading through and I'm trying to delve into the research for the show, I was trying to find something in common. The only thing I could find in common was the UFO spikes in '65. The TNT factory is kind of where the North Factory is kind of where they kind of set base, if you will, and that was like their ground zero. That was like their headquarters, you know. There was always kind of eerie about that place. So John Cale tells these women, they're out for the babies. You need to get the crucifixes with the gold plated outline, this, that, and other. So one night, Miss Galberry, her baby's around 6 months, I think she said, 6 to 8 months. It's in the book, the report. She wakes up and she sees one of these men in black guys in the room where her and then the baby was laying in the baby bed right next to her, and her aunt was sleeping across the room. I appreciate that, Dorito. So she's in this room. She looks up and she sees what she thinks is one of the men in black. However, this guy looked a little bit different. He had like a crew cut fade. He was wearing a checkered shirt, and he still had that transparency look from what she could see. So he sparks up a cigarette. He's like making eye contact with Miss Galberry. When he sparks up the cigarette, the glare off the gold like kind of catches his attention. So when this thing turns its head, she turns her head. When she looks back, it's gone. Her aunt's asleep through this whole situation. So obviously she's unnerved. She jumps up, sits, goes in the living room, or goes in the kitchen, sits down at the kitchen table. Her aunt gets up and comes in there and starts explaining this dream of the exact same thing that happened. She dreamt about the guy. She explained the guy down to the T, from the checkered shirt to the lighter to the cigarette, everything. Her aunt dreamt this. She wasn't awake of the actual events happening. So that led me to believe, I mean, there's a lot of things that Miss Scalberry wouldn't even talk about, even in this interview where she opens up to a lot. Um, her daughter that went to school with one of the authors of this book even told him, like, Mom opened up to you about her sightings of this thing more than she has anybody else. And there was still things that she wouldn't tell this man throughout this interview about this beast. Um, so that right there is, it's one of those, definitely, oh my God moments. You see this thing in the room. You got your child there. You have this man, John Kill, warning you that these men in black are there for the children. And that's kind of like he's in there, right? So, hey, there's another Point Pleasanter. How you been, Stephanie? Yes, I was just down there in the homeland, and that's what kind of sparked me into this. Stephanie will definitely know what I'm talking about with a lot of this stuff. But with me, I don't know if it's same with you, Stephanie, but I thought I knew a lot about the Mothman. I thought, I obviously didn't think I knew everything, but I thought I knew a lot. My family's hometown. I was down there plenty of times. Actually, when I just took my wife down there, so she could kind of see. I took her up on Debbie Road, and where my family's lived, and had her experience all that. So I usually don't stop into the Mothman Museum. I've been there several different times. I uh, never really. I mean, I've been back there. They got it. If you're into that, I mean, they got several cool artifacts in the back of the Mothman Museum. They really do. So I go into this, and you start looking at these Men in Black um, spottings, these Men in Black run-ins, the UFO spikes. Then you got the Mothman, who kind of kicks up in '66. That leads into a pretty big tragedy that kind of shuts everything down. The Silver Bridge falls in 1967. I believe it was 66 people go into the water. 44, I believe, don't come out. Now, I could be wrong on my numbers. I know I got it written down there, but I don't want to flip through pages, and you guys got to hear that. But I'm about positive. Um, that's roughly the numbers. I mean, that's a huge tragedy for such a small area. The bridge falls. Yes, if it's back up, Stephanie, I'm definitely going this year. I have never been to the Mothman Festival. I've never been down there for it because for me, like I said, my grandfather he would dismiss it. But if you're down there in that area, and Stephanie can definitely relate to this, you can see how something like this could be a thing, especially around the TNT area. They call them igloos. They're more bunkers. I remember running around and messing around with it, and being around there and just having fun doing kid stuff in the bunker. And of course it's tagged with graffiti and things like that. But for me, I would say I'm a believer in the sense that the Mothman is and was a thing. Now, there are several people that think it kind of had its nesting areas up there in these igloos, and since they tore down that building, and this rural kind of like feeling you get when you're out there, it's just like a kind of like an eerie feeling. Like as soon as I don't care if you're there at 1 in the afternoon or 1 in the morning, you still feel like you're being like watched. Like it's just really you got that intuition, that feeling of something being around you, right? And the town itself is small. And again, you go back and you look at the history of this small town from Chief Cornstalk, again, which I need to get the papers. I'm going to Ohio, so I might try to get the family timeline papers where they traced it back to where we're direct descendants from Chief Cornstalk. The bloodshed there, the TNT factory is over 8,000 acres for the U.S. Army for World War II. The employees have to hop in a bus with blacked out windows to go to work. They come home to work in the same buses. Yeah, see, I mean, it's kind of still kind of a cool place. I think a majority, there's a big chunk of that land now that's owned by the Wildlife Preserve where you go fishing and hunting and things like that. And they've kind of cleaned up majority of the toxic waste. I know they found they did find some red water there that was leading into the Ohio River, and they did a big cleanup, I believe, in the 90s. Um, so you have these UFO spottings, you have the Men in Black coming, you have all these things happening, and then the Mothman in 66, the bridge falls in 67. All the reports stop. All the reports stop for the most part, right? Oh, you're over in Galples, right across the bridge. Yep, that's where my aunt's living at as well, right there in Galples. Well, a little bit north of Galples, I think. But yeah, we was just down there. We was just down there. I still enjoy the area, and I have every intention of going back now and doing my own investigations in the igloos with the equipment I have now. I want to get in there and kind of know and come up with my own ideologies because me delving into the story again, it's something I never really delved into because I heard so much of it. Like growing up, I heard so many stories about the Mothman, this, that, and the other. But I never heard. I mean, I've heard of the stories of Injured Cold. I've heard the stories of the Men in Black being around, but I never really processed them, right? Until recently, when I took my wife down there and I talked to the guy there working at the Mothman Museum and was getting his input, and I picked that book up, and he's like, "Well, you know that book there has a lot of good stuff," and it does. It has a lot of, I mean, in their own handwriting, the police reports of the Mothman, and you want to talk about synchronicities. A lot of these people didn't even know each other, would have these same, almost verbatim, the same type of reports. It looked the same, and sure enough, you seen the Mothman, the Men in Black wasn't too far behind. So the theory goes, and the story goes that the Men in Black kind of everything starts to die down again around 67 when the bridge falls and things like that. But John Kill's theory was after the children of these women that had all the sightings of the Mothman that was all pregnant around the same time. They all have these theories. John Q has these theories that they're after the children, and you got to protect the children up to age 6. That they won't be interested for whatever reason. They won't be interested after age 6, right? So they go in and like they do that, and all these kids end up growing up to be extremely intelligent. So and doing phenomenal things from being surgeons to lawyers. I mean, just really great brains and very intelligent people. And I'm I went through stages, you know, like I'm big into the paranormal. I never really messed with the Mothman too much, man, and that's my roots, right? That's where I come from, is down there. You know, that's where my bloodline streams from, is Point Pleasant, Galples, Leon, like that area is where majority of my bloodline comes from my mother's. Now my father's is hard for me to trace back because he was adopted, and you got to go through that. Um, yeah, doors definitely. If you're down, I plan on going down, and hopefully I can figure out a time where Tyler can go down with me and we can do a full investigation and do our own thing. Another cool piece, I don't know if you've ever even watched it, Stephanie, is there's a show called Hellier. Now, Hellier starts out with the Kentucky Goblins and more cryptology that I'm going to end up covering again on this show one of these Friday nights. But they find their way into Point Pleasant, and they do some studies in the igloos and the bunkers, and that's what kind of brought me back to it. Now, when I took this trip down, I had no intention whatsoever of getting into this Mothman circle, right? And now I find myself where it's kind of been consuming, really. I mean, reading through this book, looking through literature, and looking through different articles, and reading and coming up and cross-referencing and cross-referencing that cross-reference and trying to come up with some sort of theory, my own ideology. Now, we're going to go through more reports next week on the Mothman, but what I'm going to do is I do have somebody that lived down there during this time and kind of went through it during this time is my grandmother. And I'm going to go in this weekend. It's going to be Easter Sunday, and I guess I'm going to be the only person on Easter Sunday that's going to be wanting to interview my grandmother on her accounts, just to kind of see what her thoughts are about this thing. And again, my theory on the Mothman is this. I 100% think there was something there. Now, do I think it was evil? Do I think it was like a harbinger of doom? No, I don't think it. Because again, like Miss Strawberry, like she said, there was so many so many times that it could have harmed her. Miss Scarberry could have been mauled multiple times by this thing, but it never did. It never once tried to physically harm her. It always seemed kind of scared and confused on even why it was there. And it was kind of keeping people away from that north plant. For whatever reason, the south plant was fine. It was just that north plant. It was kind of keeping people away. And from everything that I looked up, that was kind of the place to go. The drag race and to their little makeout spots, their little hangout spot was kind of up there in this area. Well, when all these things started happening, of course, a lot of the locals would go out and trying to hunt this thing, but for the most part, they kind of stayed away from the North Plant. So, what was going on in that North Plant? The Silver Bridge falls in '67. There's 2 weeks go by. Excuse me. 2 weeks go by, nobody's talking about the Mothman anymore. And then there's a trucker that says that the Mothman, right before he was coming up to the Silver Bridge, he was kind of the last semi before, he was feet away from going in the water himself. In December, frigid waters, he said the Mothman swooped down in front of him, was up on one of the pillars, and then disappeared. And then that's where you start getting in a lot of this lore of different sightings of the Mothman that we're going to be getting into next week. But I want to get some firsthand accounts from my family that was down there around the time and kind of come back in next week. We'll go over more different sightings and go over different places this thing has been seen. It's been seen as early as 2017. There's been spottings of this thing. There's people saying that they spotted this thing when the World Trade Centers fell in the smoke. They seen it flying around. I don't know. That could be a part of the whole mass hysteria condition. I don't know, but that Point Pleasant area, that's the home of this urban legend, if you will. That's its home. That's like where it's birthed from. And I want to delve in a little bit deeper on people that was there, the people that experienced it, that was around that time, Because to me, it's more intriguing. It sounds like to me that the Men in Black, for whatever reason, was using this beast as kind of a sleight of hand technique. Don't pay attention to what I'm doing. Pay attention to the 7 foot flying man. And you would. You would. Like somebody driving in a car is nowhere near as scary as a 7 foot man like beast with big glaring red eyes and a massive wing spread that can go up to 100 miles per hour without any effort. That is way more menacing than some guys driving around in a black vehicle. So, by all accounts, that would work. Now, we talked about Mary Hyde a little bit. Now, this is kind of where I'm gonna leave this episode at, and pick back up on is the Mary Hyde situation. Now, Mary Hyde, she was the reporter. She reported all the sightings. Majority of the sightings, anyways. She was a writer for the Appalachian little newspaper down there. So she was a fairly young woman. The Men in Black visited her office several times. Several people seen these guys coming in and out, trying to like persuade her not to put these stories out there. They didn't want this information getting out there. So she goes ahead and does it. Now here's where you go into different the waters get kind of muddier. Some people say that she was about to make a phone call. Some people say she did make the phone call. Only thing we know for sure is she died of a heart attack at a very, very young age for having a heart attack, a massive heart attack at a very young age, around this whole Men in Black spottings. My contact keeps trying to pop out of my eyeball. Around this whole Men in Black spottings and things like that. So, my ultimate theory is the Men in Black and whatever was going on in the North Plant in this time period from 65 to 67 was a lot more sinister than what the Mothman was. I think the Mothman was used as a tool. I'm not. Is it extraterrestrial? Is it ET? Is it? I don't know. Is it crypto? Is it kind of like a Sasquatch or a goat man? Again, I don't. I don't know. It seems to me it'd be more like the ET type of era of whatever you want to call this thing. Because again, the Men in Black kind of used this thing. Everybody that had an experience with the Mothman, almost everybody, had an experience with the Men in Black. And then also, I want to start talking. Eventually, we'll get into Entered Cold side of things, which really gets interesting and really starts spiking this story up. And it's pretty fascinating. And I'm definitely, when the weather breaks and breaks for good, uh, I'm making another trip down because it's not too far. I mean, it's roughly 4 hours from me, so it's not that terrible of a drive. I definitely want to go down there with the equipment that I got now, with the studies that I've done on it now, and kind of go. I know how to get to the places. I know how to get where I need to be, and I know exactly where these places are that these people are talking about in the books. I mean, this book is even going so far to give you reference guides and maps to get to where these places are. So um, definitely want to do that. But what I'm going to do over this weekend is get that firsthand experience, to get that frontline experience that my grandmother does have of being down there around this era, and kind of get her feel on things, on what was going on down there, what she remembers of what was going on down there, and hopefully come back with some pretty cool pictures and go over that. And we're going to pick back up with the Mary Hyde incident, and then we're going to carry on to some pretty other tripping things that was going on around this time period that kind of gets washed away because of the Mothman sightings. Again, you have something that pops up in November of 66, and from November 66 on to November 67, you have over 100 different sightings, and almost all 100 of these guys have some sort of interaction with the Men in Black as well. There's some sort of, you can't call that a coincidence at that point. If it's that many people seeing something and having darn near the exact same experience with this thing and with these people. It's something. It's no longer a coincidence to me. That's where you fall into that synchronicity um, zone, which I'll be over there talking about synchronicities with Doris and Lisa here in a couple hours or an hour, somewhere around there. They'll let me know because I'm half brain dead sometimes, most of the time. But anyways, so this is going to be a new thing. We're going to be covering all different types of cryptid beasts. We're starting off with the Mothman. This was my first little introduction to kind of dip my toes into the Mothman conspiracy with you guys. And we're going to pick back up next week where we left off with the Mary Hyde thing. And there's a lot of great, intriguing things that I think you guys are going to like, because it kind of freaked me out just reading, like just putting yourself in that situation and knowing the area and being down there and thinking, man, like there's been a few times down there when you go out hunting in those woods and you're out there at 4 in the morning getting to a tree stand where you're thinking, oh crap, you don't know what's around you, you don't know what's going to happen. It's pretty insane. Thank you, Stephanie. I really appreciate that. There you go. There's your little all right guy. I appreciate that, Stephanie. And definitely gonna be making a trip down, and I'm hoping to kind of start building a Mothman piece of my own. Is kind of where I've come to the point too. Again, we might do another podcast next Friday on the Mothman, about another hour long worth of it, and most likely we'll end it there. But I don't know. We might keep going. We might keep going into this thing because there's just so much, right? There's so much paranormal, cryptology. You got UFOs. You got Men in Black. You got Mothman. It's just there's just so much there. There's no way you could cover all that in just one show. I'm going to try to do it in two. That's why I wanted to cut it off the Mary Hyde thing so I could study the other um, accounts and study the other encounters and kind of delve into their stories while getting my grandmother's stories who lived down there around this time period. So I really appreciate it, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Again, if you guys would like to support the show, you can do what Stephanie did. Throw up a super chat. Get your little all right guy over there. Or you can hit the link up above as the PayPal link. And the Streamlab links below in the description below. I think that's kind of how they do that thing. But I appreciate you guys hearing me ramble on for a little over an hour. Kind of our introduction to the Mothman world. We'll be picking up next Friday at 9 p.m. again. Where we left off with the Mary Hyde incident. And feel free, whoever's in here, to kind of delve in and bring any information to the forefront that you want. DM me, message me, throw it up in the chat next week at 9. Like, whatever you want to do, however you want to do it. I'm going to be here every Friday at 9 now. We're going to be doing these shows. And again, next week, it's going to be Mothman Part 2, because I believe there's so much to cover. We barely scraped the surface here on the Mothman thing. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, is kind of give you the history of the area leading up to it. And it's such a phenomenal story that gets brushed to the side a little bit, I believe. I mean, there's a lot of people that know or at least heard of the Mothman. But Doris, I got a ton that we're going to be going through, and I got actual articles I want to be pulling up on screen here for you guys to see as I'm talking about it. We're going to get into that next week, where you guys can actually see the first-hand reports on what was going on, what happened, in their own handwriting. Amazing book put together, and we're definitely going to get in that next week. But again, thank you guys for hanging in here with me a little over an hour, dipping our toes into the Mothman. We're going to be picking back up with the Mothman next week, getting even deeper into some pretty crazy synchronicities and events and things that are definitely unexplainable. If it happened to one or two people, it would be unexplainable. But if it happened to 100 people, I mean, that's nuts. Definitely. Richard Gere, that movie was roughly based off John Kill's book, and they spiced it up. They produced it quite a bit. But yeah, love you too, and I'll be talking with you here soon, Doris. Everybody else in the chat, thank you again. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the super chat. I appreciate that so much. To help support the show, help support the channel, it means a lot. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And like I said, we'll be back here next week at 9 p.m. doing the same thing. I can't wait for you guys to actually get in and and see and hear some of these reports. Hey, there's another one. Love you too, sister. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Wait for the animation. It should come up. You should get your guy. Is it going to give you your guy? Let's see. Why is it not giving? There you go. There we go. There's your little headbanger. Your little all right guy. Thank you so much for that, guys. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you so much. Lisa and Doris, I'll be talking with you here very soon. We're going to get into some synchronicities over there in the roundtable realm of things. So, again, thank you guys so much. I'll see you next week at 9 p.m. We'll get a little bit more cryptid. Get a little bit more cryptid, a little bit more creepy, and delve in deeper into the Mothman thing. Much love from me to you. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you guys next Friday at 9 p.m. and we'll pick up where we left off.